Let's go! LSU football fans, you're gonna love this video today because a new stat has LSU ranked number 1 for a potential college football playoff run, okay? But there's another side to the stat that proves that this will also be very difficult to do. And I understand, based on our live stream, some of you guys do not like the new fancy schmancy analytics. And I get it, because you can dive too deep into numbers that may or may not mean anything. However, there is a simpler stat that involves simple counting that proves that this roster is a college football playoff roster. So go on ahead, subscribe to the channel, like this video if you enjoy breakdowns such as this one. Let's go! RTI is the new stat that debuted today. Yes! And it's very fascinating because it sounds like a side effect from mesothelioma. You know the infomercials, right? If you or a loved one is suffering. I can't even say it without laughing. RTI is a real stat, and it was developed by Parker at Football Outsiders. And I reached out to him. He's a super nice guy, and I like innovative new analytics. And I know it can be overwhelming, but stick with me because it will get simpler as the video moves on. And I'm not just pointing out RTI because it has LSU ranked number 1. Yes, according to Parker's deep dive into these numbers, LSU returns the most production when you factor in recruiting and transfers to next year's team. Now, Parker mentioned that he is inspired by Bill Connolly, who's like the godfather of college football statistics. He's at ESPN. He used to be at SB Nation. And what's interesting about Bill Connolly is he now works for ESPN, and he wrote an article based on returning production, which is a stat that he's been using for quite some time. And Bill is as accurate when it comes to college football projections based on numbers. And according to Connolly, LSU brings back the 31st most amount of production from last season. I know I didn't word that all smoothly, but you get the point. Only Ole Miss in the SEC, though, was ranked higher. Ironically, Louisiana, as in UL Lafayette, the Raging Cajuns, had the are number one when it comes to returning production. So, what Parker's numbers do is it factors in what that talent actually is. So this seems to be pretty good for LSU, right? Well, yeah, of course, because like I mentioned, you guys have heard it all offseason. LSU returns all these guys back from last year's team. They are probably more than any other SEC team aided by the fact that the senior years didn't count from last year. So yeah, LSU caught a bit of a break there, but still, this is ridiculous how much experience LSU is bringing back. But as we always say on this channel, college football does not exist in a vacuum. And what that means is that sometimes it's not about just you, but who's on your schedule. You see here, the only SEC team in the East that has positive RTI is Georgia. But as you see here, LSU, of course, has to play all these teams: Alabama, Ole Miss, A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. And it just happens to be that LSU gets the bad luck of having to play Florida every season in their cross-division rival game. And you guys know how I feel about that. I absolutely hate that rule. And the other team that they play is, of course, Kentucky, who year in and year out is a very well-coached, disciplined team. But still, as you can see here, RTI is not all good because LSU, of course, plays all these all these good programs right here, and they are, of course, tough to beat. And if you're going to make the college football playoff, got to make sure you don't have more than one loss. And more importantly, you got to beat Alabama. And as you see, even though they're returning or they're replacing a quarterback, they still do return a lot of talent. But it's not just that. You look at RTI and you see UCLA is 11th. They also return a lot of production. Now, I know some of you guys don't like the fancy stats, so let's simplify it while at the same time throw it back to an old video. And only my die-hard PHL supporters remember this one. So if you go back to episode 9, I can't believe it. This was when we had less than 100 subscribers, and this still is one of my favorite videos I've ever done because, I was just diving deep. I was like trying to find one stat that correlates LSU national championship runs with that said stat. And the one thing that I found to be the most accurate representation is the amount of LSU players that were selected in the NFL draft from the season before. So, from that episode, and I'll link it down below, but we're going to recap it really quickly here. LSU, on average, since 2003, which I call the modern championship era, they've averaged 6 NFL draft selections in every draft. Now, that's if you take out the 2020 draft. If you include the ridiculous amount of picks, which was 14 in the 2020 NFL draft, which is by far the most, LSU is well over 6 NFL draft picks per season. In fact, they're close to 6.5 when you factor that in. But just for a conservative estimation, a lot of statisticians would tell you take out the outlier, which is clear. 14 is the outlier here. Still, it averages 6 NFL draft picks per season. Now, what does that 6 have in common with the national championship years? Well, a lot. In 2003, 2007, 2011, and 2019, LSU had 6 or fewer draft picks from the year before. Now think about that. All these great LSU teams, one indicator is how many players were selected in last year's draft. So you get where I'm going with this. Before last season, LSU not only had 14 players selected to the NFL draft, they had 16 in the NFL Combine, and they had, if you factor in coaches and other players that didn't make it to the Combine or the NFL, they had well over 30 key personnel that left the team before the season, and that does not include the opt-outs, which we will get to in just a second. But as you can see here, this is a full list of the 2019 NFL Draft class that went to the Combine. And obviously they had 14 players selected in the actual NFL draft, but still 16. Now remember this, the year before the 2019 season, LSU only had 3 players selected in the NFL draft, which is the fewest since 2003. So you see correlation, right? LSU had the greatest team of all time. That was greatly aided by the fact that they only lost 3 NFL draft picks, which is crazy to think about because they lost Devin White, arguably one of the greatest LSU football players of all time, but they still won a national championship. Before 2011, they lost Patrick Peterson, also one of the greatest LSU players of all time. Before 2007, they lost Jamarcus Russell, Buster Davis, all those great players. Still went on to win the national championship. And then, of course, in 2003, the year before, they lost Brady James, and they still went on to win the national championship. So that tells you that tells us that it's not so much the individual player that leaves, it's how many great players leave as a whole. So you see here, the 16 players selected to the NFL Combine. How many are in the NFL Combine this year? 8. Jamar Chase, Terrace Marshall, Jabril Cox, Kerry Vincent, Tyler Shelvin, Jacoby Stevens, Trace McMath, and Torrey Carter. Now, one note, not really relevant, but still, there is no NFL Combine this year. Each team's respective pro days are considered their combine. So it's a combine, yet not really a combine, but still 8 players compared to 16 from the year before. Now, let's actually go to the 8 players in this year's NFL Combine. how many of these guys are actually going to get drafted? Okay? I do not think Torrey Carter is going to get drafted. However, 3 of them did not play at all last season. So do they really count? This is the first year where we're really starting to see this because, yes, they are technically leaving the team, but they never played, which means their snaps went to other players on the team who got that much needed experience. And the same thing is kind of true for Terrace Marshall and Racey McMath, 2 key contributors to last year's team who did not play the final 3 games of the season. Racey McMath because of injury and Terrace Marshall because of an opt-out. So really, the only players that LSU is really losing from start to finish is Jabril Cox and Jacoby Stevens. Now, I know linebacker and safety are 2 big positions of focus this offseason, but at least LSU's got new coaches to help fix those positions. So, there's not 1, the returning talent index, but 2, the NFL draft picks from the year before that shows that this team has enough to win a national championship next season. Now, as many of you would say, it's not just that, right? There's a crazy, difficult schedule that LSU has next season. There, of course, is the new coordinators that LSU is bringing in. And in and of itself, LSU needs to practice, their actual coaching. There was a lot of coaching errors from last season, both at the micro and macro level, that need to get fixed. But the point of this video is not that. That's why we have live streams to discuss these things even further, which is what we're doing for tonight's live stream or just any live stream. You can always bring it up. That's the fun thing about live streams, is that you guys get to control the conversation. So, yeah, make sure you tune into that. I'll have more on this video on tonight's live stream or just any live stream. I love talking this subject in particular, which is predictive analytics. So, I hope you enjoyed this video today. Let me know what you think, of course, down below. And there should be a video around my head right now that is one that you should probably go watch. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! Ha ha! Let's go. Slamming salmon again tonight. Let's go!